Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. So what should Greece actually do? I don't think a bailout for Greece is the answer. We've seen what bailouts do here in the United States. This is basically the hot money approach, and you just have that money flee overseas. You'd be reviving these banks. Max Kaiser suggests that Greece would be stronger after a crash and that they've got to go through the crash. And I guess that is the approach of the Austrian school. But unfortunately, if you have a crash, this gets you the destruction of an entire generation. And the experience of the 1930s does not allow us to assume that there is an automatic business cycle that lifts these countries out of depression. Remember, Heinrich Brüning and Andrew Mellon tried to argue that if you liquidated stocks and real estate, bonds, labor, and everything else, that you would then get a recovery. But I don't see any evidence that there ever was a recovery. So I would say what Greece needs is what everybody else needs, which is a good dose of New Deal, re-regulation, and some renationalization of what used to be their state sector. If you compare this to the Roman Empire, right, Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus at one point came forward and said, we've got to have land reform and we've got to cut the role of slavery in the territories conquered from Carthage in the Punic Wars. In the Han Dynasty in China, where you had a similar feudalization going on, the famous Wang Mang, contemporary approximately of Christ, came forward and said we've got to have reforms. In many ways, the Wall Street sales tax, the Tobin tax, securities transfer tax or trading tax, is the equivalent of that. Remember, the AFL-CIO is for it. Robert Kuttner, a liberal economist, is for it. Congressman DeFazio of Oregon for it. And there's a ferment for it. Japanese finance officials are in favor of a national Tobin tax, trading tax on speculators. Let's just call it a Wall Street sales tax, because none of those flows are taxed so far. Elementary self-defense for Greece would be to say, slap a 1% tax on all derivatives, stocks, bonds, options, futures, indices, combinations, and permutations thereof. All paper transactions, 1%. And again, in just about every country, there's a value-added tax or a sales tax. Somehow the bankers are exempt. They think that they're the French aristocracy before 1789, when the Ancien Regime aristocrats said, we have the rare privilege of being exempt from all taxation. And when Colbert rightly tried to tax them, they were able to fight it off back under Louis XIV. Similarly in Spain, right, the Hidalgo said to the central government under Lerma and Olivares, you're not going to tax us. We refuse to be taxed. So we today have a banking oligarchy class that claims that they're exempt from all taxation. And indeed, Goldman Sachs pays, 2%, 3% corporate income tax. We want to get them right at the source, right at their turnover, even before they begin to make money. We want to show them that this is not for free, because the social costs of this are enormous. In other words, concrete measures to rein in the bubble economy, to cut down financialization, and to, again, take the life out of the speculative booze for these characters. Greece, otherwise, should, of course, consider a debt moratorium. 35 countries, just in the past 25 years or so, have gone through debt moratorium. We know Mexico under Lopez Portillo, Brazil in 1987, debt moratorium, and then Argentina under Rodriguez Sá in 2001. This was then administered by Nestor Kirchner, and many others. And indeed, if the Icelanders don't get a decent deal from the British and the Dutch, they should simply declare a debt moratorium. We will need, generally speaking, a freeze on all payments on international financial debt, including derivatives. And if you think that's radical, well, this starts really with Herbert Hoover in 1931 proposed the Hoover Moratorium, which was a one-year suspension on war debts and reparations after World War I as a response to the Depression. So here is Mr. Hidebound Republican free market orthodoxy himself, Herbert Hoover, with the Hoover Moratorium, saying we just can't have the world paying for this. Of course, the fatal flaw of his proposal was that it was only a year, and that at that time it had to be 5 years or the duration of the world economic depression, whichever lasts longer. Greece would obviously need exchange controls and capital controls. The problem is they can't do it because they have the euro. Now, here, what is the oligarchical strategy? It would seem that the hedge funds are determined to press the attack on Greece, to press the attack on Spain, on Ireland, perhaps, on Portugal, and then ultimately on Italy, third largest sovereign debtor in the world. Notice the one country that does not get on the pigs list is the British. The United Kingdom is growing its national debt faster than any other country in Europe. They have a full 13% plus deficit compared to GDP, but of course they're supposed to be the beneficiaries of all this. If the hedge funds, the Soros people, and so forth press this speculative assault, shorting Greek bonds and the bonds of these other countries, shorting the euro, they have a possibility of attaining the breakup of the euro, which would have a certain chaotic effect. On the other hand, it would also have positive byproducts. A country like Greece, if they went back to the drachma, they could then engage in various kinds of self-defense, such as exchange controls and capital controls to throttle the flow of speculative attack. In other words, they could take effective self-defense measures. They could also then begin to think about a modest protective tariff, which basically is going to be needed. If the Eurogorks and Eurocrats of Brussels and Frankfurt are not willing to do some obvious things, to take measures to have a Tobin tax at the European Union level. 1% tax would be a wonderful thing for Europe to begin to drain this swamp of speculation, and also some idea of other protectionist, mercantilist, dirigist, cameralist measures, then ultimately this is going to break up. And that's the Soros track record from 1992. That attack led to the temporary complete disruption of the European rate mechanism, and the British dropped out. So if you press an attack, in those days there was no common currency, and the British are still not in it. The Greeks are in the euro, but they may not be in the euro for long. So essentially, this is now the second wave of the Depression. And one of the effects of the second wave of the Depression is that the Tea Party people, who have now been sold, at least to a significant degree, on this, I think, rather superficial litany of let's balance the budget, let's have tax cuts, somehow compatible, and let's reduce government spending. This makes no sense. If you, in a depression, cut your budget, if you destroy your social safety net and your education budget, you'll come back with a bigger deficit the following year, because government spending is such an important part of overall economic activity. You cut that, you cut your tax receipts, you cut the general level, you'll have a bigger deficit. The more you cut, the bigger your deficit will be. Back in a minute.